Hey, Brooke here. Before we get into this week's episode, we have a special invitation for you, the listener and the viewer. If Intentional has impacted you, helped you, blessed your life, changed it in any way, we would love to know about it. So here's how we would love for you to let us know about it. Simply take a 1-minute selfie style video with yourself or yourself and your spouse and submit it to info@intentionalparents.org. That's it. You just have to submit the content there, and we would love to use this information or content in future episodes. By submitting this email, you're saying that you are thumbs up okay with us sharing that. And we also want you to know that this information is something that we just so deeply value. So if this is interesting to you or sounds like something exciting for you and your spouse to do, or for you to do by yourself, please do that and submit that content in the next few weeks, and look out for the content in the future. You're listening to the Intentional Parents Podcast, brought to you by Intentional. Intentional is all about spiritual formation in the family. We desire to bring biblical hope and practical help. Enjoy this week's conversation. On today's show, we have Jay Kim. Jay is a pastor, he's an author, and he's also a podcast host. Jay leads a church called Westgate Church in Silicon Valley. He's written a handful of books, including Analog Church and Analog Christian. And he also hosts a podcast called The Digital Examen, where he actually walks through what it looks like to actually practice digital examen in real time. Beautiful stuff, fascinating. And if you're interested in anything I just mentioned, please make sure to check all the show notes and click on any of that stuff. Recently, Jay and I were in Nashville and we sat down and had these conversations around what does it look like to go to an analog church? What does that mean? What does it look like to be an analog Christian? And how does this actually impact our most deep and sincere relationships? So I really have no doubt that you will enjoy our conversation. Also, just one last thing before we get into our conversation with Jay. We are part of an algorithm. We don't have much choice in the matter. So if this is at all been helpful to you, these podcasts or content, would you just help us in one of three ways? One, you can subscribe to the podcast. Secondly, you can rate the podcast. And thirdly, you could comment. It's really helpful if you do all three, but even if you just pick one of those, immensely helpful. And we just want to say thank you in advance for doing that. Also, if you want to watch this podcast, all you have to do is head over to YouTube and you can watch the whole episode there. So enjoy today's conversation with Jay Kim. All right, welcome to the podcast, Jay Kim.
Thank you for having me.
Two dudes sitting in an industrial space.
Just two guys. Just two guys hanging out.
That could be a podcast. I'm so grateful that you took the time to sit with us. Thank you. Elizabeth was unfortunately planning on being here. She had to fly out this morning. We're in Nashville together.
Yeah.
You and I are in the same place. We were actually in the same place last week in Portland.
Yes.
Yes, together.
Yeah, I love it.
Practicing the way
Where are you
event.
going to be next week? Where are we going?
Oh, actually, if you want, we have an event. Actually, this is a great plug. I think by the time this comes out, the Motherhood Retreat will be over, but we have a Motherhood Retreat going on in Bench. So that's the next big one coming up. But in the meantime, where are you next? You're somewhere next.
Yeah, I'm home for a couple of weeks and then I'm out in Denver after that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So I would love to, obviously everyone heard your intro. So you write, you speak, podcast, you lead a church. Like there's all these different things going on. Before all those things, and those are wonderful things, you're a husband, you're a father. Give us a little intro to your family. And who is Jay Kim? The real Jay Kim.
Oh, the real me.
the real Jay Kim.
The real me. Yeah, I'm a husband to Jenny, my wife. She's a high school teacher.
Okay. What grade?
She teaches high school, all grades. So she's a special ed teacher.
Oh,
and she's been doing that for 12 years.
I didn't know that.
I don't know how she does it. It's
what a grace.
Labor of love. Yeah, my respect and admiration. I always had respect and admiration for educators, but after my wife became an educator, I was like, holy smokes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know?
She's been doing it for how long? You said
12 years
12
now.
years.
Yeah, wow. She was in nonprofit before that and then got into education. And but we've been married 16 years and been together for 22 years now, which is crazy to think about.
Together. So you dated for a while.
We dated for a while.
For ages.
I think I knew I wanted to marry her pretty early on, 2 years in. But she was we were both in college. And then as she was nearing graduation from undergrad, she was like, hey, I think grad school is my next thing. And grad school was a bit of a ways away. I was a youth pastor at the time.
Oh,
Didn't feel called to move. So we did the long distance thing for 2 years, which was the hardest 2 years of our entire relationship. It was really rough. But yeah, been together a long time. Over half our lives, really. It's crazy. And then we got 2 young kids. Yeah, Harper. My daughter Harper is 9. She's in 4th grade. And then our son Simon is 6, and he's in kindergarten. And they're so fun and crazy. Dude, yeah, it's
a fun stage. Our youngest 2 are 8 and 6, and right in that stage, man, I feel you with that for sure. I have a handful of just questions, but last week and I guess some of it here too, but last week I couldn't actually listen to you speak here where we're at, but last week you opened at the time your talk for a quick minute with this idea of a picture. Could you just explain that again? Because not only was and it's going to be hard because you can't see the photo, but you'll give an idea. But like, I loved the framework that you started that with. That was really helpful. And obviously we're talking about all things, if you know anything about Jay's work, spiritual formation type stuff, but obviously slowing down. Your latest book, Listen, Speak. Yeah. I want to talk about that. I would love to talk about Analog Christian. But yeah, could you maybe, but that it was Picasso, correct? Yeah. Picasso. That whole thing was like, so you mind just taking us on that journey for a minute?
Yeah. I mean, people just Google it, or folks who are even like vaguely familiar with Picasso. When you hear the name Pablo Picasso, you think a very specific type of art, basically surrealist, abstract, weird, strange, deconstructed, sort of stuff. And that's what comes into our mind's eye when we hear Picasso. So I showed a painting of his.
We'll put it on, if you're watching on YouTube, we'll put it on YouTube.
Yeah, I showed a painting called Guernica, which is probably his most famous work. And it's like, it is Picasso. It's just like weird, strange, very abstract. But what most people don't know about Picasso is that there's a museum actually in Barcelona called the Picasso Museum. Okay. And his most famous, well-known works are not there. But the reason it's an important place is the Picasso Museum in Barcelona is home to the largest collection of Picasso's earliest works. So there are paintings there that he made when he was like 14, 15, all the way into his early 20s. And when you walk through the Picasso Museum in Barcelona, in your mind, you're like, this is not a Picasso museum. Because none of it, until near the very end of you begin to see his transition toward the end. Yep. But the first 80% of the museum, you're like, there's no way this is Picasso, because the pieces are all super, they're realism. Yes. It's like almost photorealistic.
Yes,
and very few people know that about him, that he was like a really gifted realist.
When you had shown that and the contrast of both of those photos, it was jarring, because I was like, wait, that's not what he did. Exactly. And no one, I mean, truly, and I'm obviously no art buff, but it was like, that's beautiful. Like the skill, it was almost like he's probably unskilled. That's why he's doing the non-traditional. That's what
a lot of people think. It's
the non-traditional painting.
A lot of critique of Picasso is like, oh, he doesn't really know how to paint.
Yes.
So he's just making weird kids drawings and calling it art kind of thing.
Yes.
And then you quickly realize, no, when he was 12, he was beautifully painting, very almost photorealistic. Yeah. So he had all the skill. The reason he becomes a surrealist, there's several reasons, but when he's 7 or 8 years old, Kodak company releases the camera, viable the camera. Photography existed as a technology, but it was the first time that normal everyday people could have a camera. Yeah. And by the time Picasso's in his teenage years and his early 20s, lots of people have cameras. There's lots of photographs everywhere.
Yeah.
And so before that, realistic painting, realism, was functional. People would get their portraits done because they wanted to remember their family and have, but because of the photograph, realism wasn't necessary in the same way.
Yeah.
So the reason we know Picasso the way we know him today is because he didn't just oh, well, I guess I'm not needed now as a painter.
Yeah.
He and others, they reimagined the art.
Yes.
And they said, okay, if photographs are going to do this, if technology is going to do this, we can take art to places way deeper, way more interesting, things that photography can't do, the camera can't do.
Yes.
And the point I was trying to make is as a dad, first of all, just as a human in the digital age, I often feel overwhelmed by my own digital addictions. And I just kind of like want to resign myself. Like, well, I guess this is like my terrible digitally addicted life now. Yeah. And then as a dad, sometimes I can get overwhelmed with anxiety for my kids. Like, holy smokes, they're going to grow up with this crazy onslaught of social media. Yeah. And I take a lot of hope in art, like in Picasso. It's like, no. Like, the technology does not have to subsume my life or the life of my kids. Wow. We can reimagine our lives and create something far more beautiful that technology can't take from us, Wow. So that's why I shared the story.
Yes. That's exact. I mean, that hope at the end of that, and the visuals are so strong because it's so, and I love the in-depth. I'm glad I got to hear the full in-depth. You've written on this topic, but the Digital Examen is a podcast that you have. So everybody, that'll be in the show notes. Go stop what you're doing. Go subscribe to that podcast. But tell me kind of where that emerged, right? Because obviously you have written works, which we'll talk about. But the Digital Examen, tell us first what that's about, really. I mean, obviously we can guess what those words technically mean, but where did that emerge? And then what are you trying to conquer? And really not conquer, but how are you trying to help through that medium?
Yeah. For several years now, I have been personally in my own life and now sort of with my family, and we've invited our entire church in the last year or so.
Which I want to put a pin on. I want to ask you about that in a minute.
We've just offered the Ignatian practice of the Examen, which folks who are unfamiliar, I'm sure many are familiar, but it's like a very simple prayer practice. It moves through sort of 5 simple movements every day to spend time with God in his presence. Nothing magical. It's just quieting down enough to ask God by his Spirit to deepen and to heighten our awareness of his presence, and then to actually talk with him, like in a very simple way. So I've been practicing that for a while, for a few years, and it became transformative. It wasn't transformative on day one, obviously.
I was going to say, when do you actually, like nuts and bolts, when do you actually do that? Is that like something you close the day with? Is that something you try to open the day with? Or just, because I know some that people like examine their week on Saturday or Sabbath. They'll try to examine the week.
Lots of ways to do it.
Yeah. Which ways do you prefer?
So I spend time practicing the Examen personally on my own every morning.
Okay.
And then we have a family time every night with our kids, where we created this sort of like, it's very simple, but it's like a family Examen guide. It's like 5 movements, ways to just invite your young children to sit with you in the quiet.
Every person listening is going to want to know what those are. So
happy to share it around. I mean, it's so simple. It's just like a little digital.
But it needs to be simple, right?
Yes.
So maybe we can grab that from you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Share it.
Happy to share it.
Yeah. But give us an example of that.
So we do that with our family. So we sit down and with our kids, we're 9 and 6, and the movements are really simple. It's like you invite God by his Spirit to make you more aware of his presence. You gratitude is the next movement. You just thank him for one thing that day. It's very specific, one beautiful thing that was a gift from him. And then you reflect on your day, and specifically you think about one hard thing from that day. And you just offer it to the Lord. Say, God, this was hard. And then you confess or repent, like one thing, just one thing. Like, this was not the way of Jesus today.
That's so good with kids. The one thing,
it's great.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, that's so good.
And then one thing tomorrow that you need God to help you
looking
with.
Forward to.
So we do that every day. Like, we just like with our kids. Like,
logistically speaking, with kids, when do you find when's a good time for you guys to actually do that?
Never.
Yeah. Thank you. I was going to say, I was like, I don't know. I'm trying to think right now. When would bedtime? No, that wouldn't work. Dinner time? I don't know, man. After dinner, there's a lot of stuff going on, and the energy, the differences, all that stuff. So just whenever at night, or
it's at night. It's not the last thing we do before they go to bed, because I feel like at that point, they're kids, so they need like some sort of incentive. Although now we've done it long enough where they just know, like, it's a rhythm in our house. But early on, they needed some form of incentives. Both of our kids love reading, and they just want to like stay up as long as they can reading, and so that's what we've done. So we've said, okay, like, you can get a little bit of reading time in your room before bed, but remember, we like spend time with the Lord before we do that. So there's other things we do too. Like, we do we go through the catechism with them.
Yeah.
So there's a whole other thing that we do with them.
So we
do
the most
that.
Spiritually educated kids.
No. I
love it.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, this is something I talked about in Portland. It's like, we're actually trying, and we guard against over informing our kids.
Yes.
Like, I want my kids to know. I want them to like grow into theological awareness of things. And I want to be the sort of dad that welcomes the doubt and the skepticism and the questions. But my desire is like not to inform my kids. And this is a journey for me too, but I really want my kids to experience God, you know?
Yes.
I want them to actually, dude, like when we were in Portland, when I got up to teach, I don't know if you remember, but the first thing I said was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this because I was like the last speaker of that session. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this because I'm still processing stuff. That, you know, Tyler Staton was there and he had said some things that put words to things that God had been doing in me. And after that whole session, I went to lunch with our team. We're at this like incredible Thai restaurant in Portland. And I'm just like weeping as I'm eating my curry. Because I had this moment where I default typically to a life of the mind. It's just my personality. But I think one of the things I've run up against is like, man, there is not enough. First of all, I don't have enough knowledge. But even if I had air quotes like enough knowledge, there's not enough knowledge in the world that will help my kids actually experience the love of God in a real way. What I need is for God by his Spirit to meet them. So when we practice the Examen together as a family, that's what I'm after. Like, I'm not really looking for them to say the right thing. And most nights my kids are just like,
oh, whatever.
And most nights my son, my 6-year-old is like, and God, please forgive me for, I don't know. I don't think I did anything wrong. And we have to like prompt him.
Well, today you did say this that way. That's exactly what I did.
And he's like, oh yeah, forgive me for that. You know?
I just love how real that whole exchange is. It's so, that's, you have to tell you, no, you actually have sinned. Right. I've witnessed it and been actually probably the one seeing most of it.
Totally, man. It's like, buddy, remember 10 minutes ago when you yelled at me that you didn't want to brush your teeth? That's kind of not good. Maybe you should ask so totally. So, but that's not what I'm after. I'm not trying to get him. What I want in that entire exchange is like, God, I just want him every night in the rhythm of this thing that for him probably on most nights is very boring. I want him over the course of time, months and years, to look back and say, oh, you know what? Like, I sat with dad and mom and my sister and the risen Christ in my little room. Like, Jesus was there.
Yes.
And he's there. He's here.
Yes.
And what's humbling and scary and beautiful about that whole thing, I don't control any of that. I just create the room. So it's not really even about the Examen. It's just, I'm just creating some framework to get my family together and surrender it and say, God, we need you. Like, I need you in this room, in this space. And the gift is, you're right here. You know, you're right here. And so it's not that we'll do the Examen forever because we're committed to the Examen. It's just any tool that helps us sit together as a family with the risen Christ, who by his Spirit forms us. That's what I'm after. And the Examen is the tool we're using right now. So.
We have something really exciting we want to share with you. For many years, we've gotten questions like, how do I stay married in this moment? Or what do I do with the troubling nature and reality of my marriage? How do I love my spouse well? How do they love me well? How do we take all of our past and present and bring it together in a healthy way that not only glorifies Jesus, but blesses us and blesses our family? These are great questions, and we've heard you. Here at Intentional, we are excited to announce that we're going to be launching Intentional Marriage. We are wanting to help couples all around the world in their journey of being married. And we want to help them not only just grow, but thrive and even flourish. So here's how we're going to start this. Starting May 2025, we're going to have 2 different weekends away out here in Bend, Oregon at Brasada Ranch. And these are 2 different weekends for couples to get away, sit under the teachings of the scripture, to be refreshed, encouraged, and to hopefully go back into the real world every day with new tools, new resources, and skills to really love each other well. We know that marriage is hard. We also know that it's beautiful, and we know it's a gift. So we want to start the process of helping marriages all around the world, and we're going to start with these retreats. So here's all you need to do. Click the link in the show notes, or simply go over to intentionalparents.org, click on Marriage Retreat, sign up, and we can't wait to see you there. Here's to all the future and current marriages. We are so happy to be on this journey with you. So well said. Thank you for giving realistic hope to those who are like, I'm trying to do this and it's supposed to look that way. I think when people give this expectation that you're supposed to sit down and these family moments are going to be anything but basically chaotic.
Yeah, totally.
Like I just, every time, dude, I'm not kidding. Like we'll sit down to do prayer, right? We're okay, guys, let's pray at dinner. I mean, somebody's making a joke or like not listening, or like they're holding hands, like they're squeezing my hand too tight. I'm like, can we just... We're trying to pray. Like this is a moment.
Most nights I'm just trying to, when my daughter is praying, most nights I'm just trying to get my son not to like spin around in his sister's chair at her. You know what I mean?
That's
like,
so real. I
buddy,
just appreciate. Yeah, I'm so glad you're saying that though, because that is the most real thing, right? Like I don't think there's the Examen piece, right? It's probably 80% of the time going to probably feel like what you just described. Yeah. Because I mean, the breakthrough moments that we have with our kids are in the sense of like where they actually are responding to this like moment that we're creating is so infrequent. We do find though, just to your point, is that the consistency in creating the framework does give them something to launch out of, even if they can't acknowledge it in the moment. I think it's really important what you said, and creating the framework is beautiful. I'd be curious about, you said the digital Examen, right? So tell me about a digital Examen versus, because I love the familiar, like that was like epically helpful, but tell me about the digital Examen. I mean, again, I can guess to a degree, but I'd love to hear like how you dissect that.
Yeah. I mean, mostly, well, specifically to the podcast, it's just called the digital Examen because again, like Picasso reimagining art, I'm just trying to, this sounds like really grandiose. It's not. I'm just trying to like reimagine. I think a lot about just our people. Most of the work I create is just born out of what I'm thinking about when I think about our church people.
Westgate, yes.
And everyone's on their phones like they are everywhere. Yeah. And, you know, like I live in a very like up and to the right, highly educated intellectual. So everybody's trying to like habit stack, you know, growth and whatever.
Yes.
So everyone's listening to podcasts on their way to work, and podcasts are great. I love them.
I hate them, but we're doing one right now.
But what I love about, for example, like Intentional Parents, like these are conversations, and I've listened to and watched some, and what I love about it is they help me feel like what you and Elizabeth do. It helps me feel like I'm sitting down at a table. But many podcasts feel like I'm sitting in a chair in a lecture hall, and now I've got to intake and ingest all this information. And how will I leverage what I just learned into whatever progress or whatever? So in many ways, I think the digital Examen I'm trying to do in part like what you guys are already doing, which is essentially trying to co-opt, you know, what happens when people go on their phones, which is like frenzy, hurry, you know, progress, growth, you know, all those sorts of things, which are not bad, but can get overwhelming.
Sure.
And I'm trying to create like really slow, spacious experiences through your phone.
Yes.
So, all of our episodes are they move kind of not totally cleanly, but they move through the movements of the Examen. I'm usually talking to someone that I want to learn from.
Yes.
And then there are these just interludes where it's like, this is like a no-no in podcasting, but I'll invite people
to do it then,
to think about a thing.
Yes.
And then it's just silence. I mean, there's like some underscored
show music. So you're like, hey, we haven't checked out completely.
Right. Exactly. And what's so fascinating is the feedback we've gotten is like, oh, those are the moments I enjoy the most. It's not the talking. It's
which
crazy.
you're both like, thank you. And how, totally. And do you understand that I've put a lot of work into this.
Totally.
No, but I know what you mean. But to give people space, I mean, permission is such an important piece of. I was talking to someone last night. I was playing pickleball with some dudes.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be allowed to do that. I've only played pickleball a couple times. They were awfully competitive, and every team that lost had a common denominator, and I was on those teams. So anyway, I mean, I'll let you do the conclusions, but I was talking to a guy, he's a writer, and he was basically saying, he's writing a whole new book on this idea of permission.
Yeah.
And so many people, I think, know what they need to do, meaning they've heard a lot of teachings. They've heard J. Kim give me the best teaching on this idea, right? Then they've heard all this cultural noise. And at the very same time, they really do have an instinctive, spirit-filled understanding of what to do. Most of the time, they need permission. They need someone like you on the other side of the podcast to go, now just stop and listen. And honestly, there's so much that happens when someone that has experienced it, walked through it, give permission to somebody else. I think of it when, I mean, obviously digital stuff's easy to pick on currently because it's just such an obvious one, but there's so many folks that we talk to that feel the pressure of giving their kids a phone early. And most of the time, like Elizabeth and I have our own convictions and our own digital rule of life. We have our own stuff that we've already decided on, right? Yeah. At the very same time, what we find more often than not is they already know what they want to do. It's just us saying, you could do it, Yeah. Like you could totally do it. You don't have to do it. You could totally skip that and things will be okay, And that's like, apply that to 1,000 other places. Right. It's so true that's a big part of how life works. So with the podcast, you giving them permission is a gift, and you going on your own journey that's a beautiful thing. I want to ask about, because obviously you do a lot of different stuff, which I appreciate. I'm not going to ask you what your favorite thing is, but I will say, what is something out of what you get to do, and obviously you're not picking favorites, but what brings you life? Because you lead a church, it's a large church in Silicon Valley. So lots of teams, pressure. I know that world, right? And then you've got writing, you've got speaking, you've got podcasting, you've got these different things that you're trying to obviously pull together and help people with. Yeah. Is there one that brings more life than the other, or is it an all life-giving thing, or what brings you life?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy all of it in their own ways. Yeah. Immediately when you ask that question, for me, I'm a local church guy. Like, I don't think I'm a writer, speaker. Yeah. I think I'm just a local church guy who happens in this season of life to write and speak a little bit from that place. Yeah. So even now, just being here, you and I'm 5 hours away from home, and it's a real gift and an honor and a privilege to be here and shared some thoughts with folks here. Yesterday we were in Portland. Yeah. But even now, even when I'm, doing some of that stuff, I see myself even in those moments, like even now, this conversation, that'll go to however many people who are not a part of my congregation. Sure. I just think I'm a local church pastor. Yeah. And hopefully some little thing that we're doing in our context is helpful to some folks, right? That's how I feel. So the thing I think that I enjoy most in terms of my ministry life is being in the trenches with our entire team, but specifically like those I work closest with. One of them's with me here. Yeah. Oh, David.
I told him to his face, he's one of my favorite people. I love the way he processes the world. I love it. We had a great chat yesterday.
I love being in the trenches with those folks. Yes. Watching God do what God's doing and to be able to share that experience together and to try our best to steward the calling to love our people well and serve them well. That's probably my favorite thing. And all the other stuff I do kind of flows out of that.
Yeah. So. You do. And I don't know all of the things, but I know you've done some really beautiful work and initiatives, meaning things that are not common to the normal church experience, churchgoers experience. What are some of the things that, especially in your context of Silicon Valley, it's so different in so many ways, but what are some of the things that you guys are attempting and pressing into? Because I know there's a couple of things you've mentioned in other spaces, but I'd love to just kind of hear what you're pressing into and maybe excite and ignite some folks that might be listening to go like, oh, we can even do this in our family or in our churches as well.
Yeah, I mean, big picture in terms of just the paradigm shift we're trying to make in terms of how we live as a church family is stuff we've already talked about, in a very frenzied, chaotic, very busy. I mean, Silicon Valley is very busy. You spend much of your life in Portland, LA. Like it's crazy.
Always, yes.
And so in the midst of that, we're trying more and more every day to create sort of a shared ecclesiology, what we would call actually like a communal rule of life that is slow, it's quiet, it's small. So we're trying to do that as much as possible.
Yes.
And that comes by way of just small little practical things. So like the Examen, what we talked about is an invitation we made to our entire church. Like everybody practice the Examen every day. If you're a family, practice the Examen together as a family, and we try to name it like the way we're talking about it now. We try to really name it because we also live in such a performative culture. It's like, okay, we're going to do the Examen and we're going to excel, and then kids
we're going to put it on social media,
and then it's just going to be like amazing, you know?
Yeah.
And we try to name it like, no. It's probably not going to feel amazing. It's probably going to be quite boring for your kids. And for you early on, it'll probably be frustrating. But what we are after is cultivating a garden, not microwaving our spirituality.
Yes.
And so we're just planting seeds and tilling the soil. And really at the end of most days, you're just going to look at your fingernails and be like, they're dirty and this is gross. And But what we're after is like, in seasons to come, we start seeing these like little, life begin to grow from the dirt. And that's very different than Silicon Valley culture, which is I pitch to the VC and in Q1 of next year, I've got to have these returns so I can do my Series B fundraising. It's like, and that's fine. It's great. So I'm not a business guy, but I'm sure that's how you got to roll, and that's fine. But we want to offer an alternative vision for how to be human, and so it's things like that. So we're just trying to help people slow down. So another thing we've done is, this sounds really counterintuitive. We have made the process of really deeply engaging our church family, like family membership, things like that. We've actually made it, I would not say harder, but we've made it just take more of your time so that if you're going to do it, you have to actually recalibrate your priorities. And then when you say, I'm going to do it, when you enter those spaces, we create really slow space. So it's like inefficient. You know what I mean?
Wow, yes.
So I've seen a lot of people come in and be like, dude, that could have been like, that 2-hour thing could have been like 45 minutes. We're like, it could have been. But
there's a reason we're not.
But that means you would have just gotten information.
Yes.
We could have given this information to you like without even meeting, to be honest.
Yes.
But that's not what we're after. We're after transformation, which is slow and it's communal.
Yes.
And it's over meals and it's, we're trying to create spaces like that.
I have a curiosity with that because obviously one of your books, Analog Christian, I'm imagining, especially because of where you live, there is a level of that word analog probably feels really nice. I think when I hear that word anymore, I'm like, I like that word. And primarily because like when I grew up and all that stuff, but I do remember a world when you could just pick one movie or one record or one CD. I was just hanging out with someone last night again who is he's been an artist for a long time. And he's like, I remember when we could sell CDs. And I was like, you had a physical item. Yeah. And I was like, he's like, I can't give you a CD, but I could show you my Spotify channel. And I was like, this is so different. I was like, but you can't sign a Spotify.
I remember going to Blockbuster Video.
Yes. Oh, what a gift.
They would show the VHS tape cover and then the blue cases behind the cover.
Yes.
And
of how many you could rent.
Yeah. And you're like anticipating hopefully if it's gone, and then you're like, oh.
Do you know that In Bend is the last Blockbuster?
Dude, I did know this.
Yeah. So next time you're out,
they're still open.
They're still open. They're still doing their thing. I mean, but they can only obviously DVDs is as far as they got. Yeah. So it's just DVDs. We literally were kidding about like I think Phil, and I don't know why he has 2 DVD players, but he does. and it's primarily because he got into like a Walt Disney collection, and he was like, I'm not gonna like throw all these DVDs away.
Yeah, sure.
Although all of them now live on Disney Plus, but I digress. But I mean, just the nostalgia of even having, I was like, now DVDs are nostalgic. But
yeah,
that said, we would talk, we're like, we should just borrow one and go rent a movie just to show our kids what this is like. This is a world, and you pick the movie and you can watch it. I mean, I remember when, I don't know if you remember this, but like you'd get a movie and you'd watch it more than once.
Oh, 100%.
You'd be like, I only have 2 days with this thing.
100%.
I gotta watch this twice. I mean, it was so good, and I'm not gonna.
I remember the excitement of going and seeing the walls of movies. Yes. I grew up like, I don't watch it anymore, but I was like a professional wrestling fan when I was in elementary school.
Can we just touch hands real quick? I'm not kidding.
The WWF? Yeah, dude. Okay, I have this no one's gonna care, but it's fun for me.
So into it,
dude. I have, I couldn't afford pay-per-view or whatever, right? So like, I would have to wait till these WrestleManias would come out on VHS. And I remember begging my mom on a Friday, like, we got to go, because somehow I had found out that WrestleMania 5, which is when Hulk Hogan and Macho Man fought each other.
Yes. Oh, dude. I mean, I wasn't around for it in the sense of like, I didn't see it.
I mean, I was a little kid, and I'm a few years older than you, dude. And I remember going, and I saw the cover, and I'm like praying to Jesus, please don't let it be out. And there was. And I remember, I can feel it in my body right now, how excited I was to go home. And I'm not kidding. Because I think Blockbuster, you had to return it after 3 days.
Yeah, it was like 2 or 3 days. Yep.
I must have watched WrestleMania 5. This is not a joke. 12 times.
Wow.
Just on repeat.
Yeah. You just loved it. You soaked it up. Yeah.
And now I turn on Netflix. I'm like,
it's just too much. Oh, dude.
And I'm like, I don't know what to watch. Like, dude.
You guys do family movie night?
Friday nights.
Dude, you know how hard it is to find a family movie?
Oh, they turn into fights in my home between my daughter and my son.
Us too. We have the problem we have 4, but the problem we have is not the 4. It's the age gap. So we've got a 15 and 12-year-old who are like, let's watch something that's not lame. And then the younger two were like, is this live action? I can't have a live action. Like, you mean it's not a cartoon? Like, what are you talking about? That is the tension. And trying to find something in the middle. Oh my gosh, that world does not exist. It's just it's not marketable. The middle world.
Right.
Anyway, analog. That's where we started.
Okay.
It's a refreshing word. But I also would be curious, to maybe kind of even to finish out our time, I'd be curious from your angle, like, where did that come from for you? Analog Christian, the idea of the book. Again, I can get there in the sense of the title, but it all starts somewhere. So where did that start for you? And really, if someone's listening, they're like, I haven't actually delved into that book, I haven't delved into that work. What would maybe just even give us an idea or summary of what you would describe as an analog Christian?
Yeah. Where it started for me was my own personal digital addictions. I just found myself a number of years ago, just like most people, incessantly scrolling Instagram and what was called Twitter back then, and whatever else. And I can trace it all the way back, actually, like
to WrestleMania. I knew you were going 12 hours. That's quite an addiction, dude. I just want to tell you.
No, I remember MySpace.
Oh, yes.
I think it's still around.
I remember MySpace? Yes, I think anybody that's listening to this knows about it. Yeah.
So youth pastor at the time, and I remember all my kids were on it, so it was like one of those weird justification things. Well, I gotta go.
Gotta connect with the kids. Connect with the kids.
And then I was addicted.
Yeah.
And then that just never stopped. It was like a decade of just incessant sort of scrolling all the time. And as we became parents, that's when kids are mirrors, and
yes, sir.
I had all these moments, a few in particular that I'll never forget, where I realized that my children were experiencing me as in like an absent dad, and my dad was literally absent. I didn't know my father. So there's a whole sort of layer of, family of origin stuff that I'm working through there. But I remember having this experience when my kids were really little. It's like, oh my gosh, I've grown up with this very complicated relationship with my father, a man I did not know, because he was an absent dad. I've sort of like cast him as almost a villain in my life or something for many years. And I just had this moment where I was like, I'm an absent dad. Sure, I'm like physically here,
Yeah, but
what's the difference, really? Honestly, in some weird ways, it's like worse because they're like so confused.
Yeah,
you know,
you're like,
why is Dad parenting that little black box in his phone and not me? You know, like that was their experience.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing. Is like, okay, this has to change. Like, I can't live this way. I don't want to live this way.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking about our church, and at the time, our church was moving from one gathering or one congregation in one location to the sort of traditional multi whatever.
Yeah.
And it was all tech based. It was all like, yeah, we'd do video venues.
Yeah.
And I didn't know why, but I felt like that's weird to me, you know?
Totally.
And I was a teaching pastor at the time. It's like, I got to look at that camera and pretend they're people, but it's not, it's a camera, you know? And it's not like some blanket critique on churches that do that model. It was just me, how I was processing.
It felt very weird. Yeah.
And so all of that created this sort of like, man, this, like the digital opportunities before us are fine, and we can take advantage of them in healthy ways. Like, I think this is a great way to get encouragement out there to people and resources. Yeah. I think it's awesome. But I realized, man, if I'm not mindful of the push and the pull of what these technologies are doing, all it's going to do is pull me. It's just going to suck me in unless I'm willing to like pull back. You know what I mean? And create a tension that's healthy to put it in its rightful place. So for me, as I thought more and more about it, I realized, there is like a theology of this. And it is the theology of incarnation, that Christ is God in the flesh. And, you know, or like even the birth of the early church in Acts 2, it says the story begins at Pentecost, all of the believers were together in one place. And it's like, there's so much in the scriptures. And I understand it wasn't written during the internet, but for me, what I realized was like, man, the Bible's pretty clear that God he had to create a bridge across the divide or the chasm between himself and broken, sinful humanity. And the way he did it was incarnation or analog, like embodied presence. And there's a power in that. Jesus died like an embodied light. He literally physically died, you know, and physically rose again. And so that got the wheels turning for me. And just the more I dug in, the more I realized like, man, and it's not just me, it's like secular social scientists are making it pretty clear. Oh, dude. Face-to-face embodied experiences matter when it comes to being human.
It's so funny. I don't mean to cut you off, just to maybe
it's great.
To praise what you're saying is, you know, we don't actually end up doing a ton of interviews on this show. We're not a primarily based interview show. At the same time, every guest that we've had in the recent past, yourself included, has mentioned the very same thing, that there's something going on in this world that we all know. And obviously I think people are probably tired in one sense of hearing like digital stuff's a problem.
Right.
I think it's become such a problem that everyone is saying, we're at the deepest level, we're revolting, and we can't continue in this. And so that's why I think, as if you're listening here and you're like, what are some good answers? I think things like the digital Examen, go check that out. That'll be in the show notes. Your book, Analog Christian, you have a book, Analog Church. I just want to thank you, even with our time, for doing the work to really help speak to some of the problems of our moment. You know, this is a cultural moment that none of us really expected per se. I mean, super educated, wise people probably saw this coming. And I think maybe some folks were like, yeah, I saw it, but it has come on like a wave. Yeah. And it's destroying so many churches and worlds. And the initiatives you're doing and the things that you're attempting even in Silicon Valley, which is so counter, it's just beautiful. The church is rising up to actually be Jesus to the culture in the moment and to do things differently. My last question for you, because we could talk for a very long time. Something recently, and this can be on or off topic, so this is like up to you. What is one thing that you've been learning recently that has just either given you hope, or one thing that you've been learning that's just been really fascinating? You're like, you know what, this has been pretty cool. It's not on topic, right? Like, it's just been pretty cool, and I've been really encouraged by it.
Yeah. Oh man, there's a whole world. I won't go into great detail, but I said earlier, I default typically to the life of the mind.
Yes.
And I've been on a journey for a number of years now where I've come to realize that one of the reasons I default to the life of the mind is because I had some experiences in my teenage years in church where the Holy Spirit and the idea of the Holy Spirit was like really abused. And so I think I sort of like I've spent 20 years sort of reacting to that as a pastor. And I just feel like the Spirit of God is doing a new thing, in me personally. And then I'm watching him do it in our church, in people's lives, just inexplicable things that I'm like, either this is just weird, like groupthink psychosis, or like the Spirit of God is doing something cool amongst people. So it's very exciting for me. Yeah, it's really exciting for me. And I'm just trying to hold it very humbly and with a posture of openness to what God's doing. So,
well, thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for taking time to sit on this podcast. And we'll make sure all your stuff's in the show notes. Where can we find you online? So your church, you lead Westgate Church, San Jose. So if you're in any of that area, go say hi to
you can
Jay.
find me there. That's what I was saying.
He'll be there every Sunday.
I'll be there every Sunday. Most Sundays, Silicon Valley, and we can go get mediocre food. We're not a great food city.
A very average food city.
So very,
but you're close to very good food cities.
We have decent coffee.
That's the thing.
So there's a couple. If you like Asian food, there's great Asian food.
Okay.
Generally, anyways, I don't know where this conversation
No, it's good.
You can find me there in San Jose.
Yeah, he'll be there.
Or just online, jkimthinks.com is a website where most of my work is. And then that's just like my handle on different things.
Okay, awesome. And then we'll leave all the podcasts. Go subscribe to those. Jay, thank you.
Thank you so much, man.